So welcome everyone to IBA 614 Global Marketing. Today is our fourth session. And in today's session, we will be treating the topic Internationalization Theories and Models. Now, the main aim of this session is to be able to make us all appreciate the concept of theorization as it applies to the practice of global marketing. So we are going to learn some of the underlying theories and models that will help us to explain what is happening in practice with regard to how firms internationalize and how they go about the process, depending on which theory or model they decide to apply. So in today's session, as usual, there are certain learning outcomes we hope to have achieved by the end of the session. And today we have three of them. The first one being to be able to understand the forms of internationalization theories that exist. And then the second one will be to be able to analyze and compare the types of theories and the various models under each of them, explaining a firm's internationalization process. Because like I mentioned, depending on the approach that a firm chooses to adopt to their internationalization or their global marketing, they will be applying a particular kind of theory, which will reflect in the model that they are using in practice to perform the global marketing activity. So we will be able to analyze and compare the differences between these theories and models. And then finally, we will also be able to explain how these theories and models differ from each other. And based on that, moving forward, when we observe the global marketing activities, including the internationalization of firms around us, we can be able to clearly pinpoint which approach they are using and why they decided to use that approach, perhaps as against selecting another approach. So these are the main learning outcomes that we are going to achieve by the end of today's session. So let's begin. We will start from the theories of internationalization. Now, when it comes to internationalization, marketers apply different theories in an attempt to describe and explain firms' internationalization processes. So that being said, it's obvious that every firm, depending on their motives for going international and their resources, given the nature of the internal environment and the external environment in which they are operating, will choose a particular approach towards their internationalization or global marketing. Now, based on marketing theory, there are three main forms of theories that firms can decide to adopt when it comes to their global marketing activity. These include the stage models. So the models that come under this particular theory are reminiscent of the nature of the theory, which is stage model. So if we take each of the theories, there are individual models that fall under them that help us to be able to explain firms' internationalization processes. So as I said, there are three of these theories, even though they are called models and not theories, right? You can also call them theories. So we can have the stage model or the stages theory, the contingency model or the contingency theory, and then the interaction models or the interaction theory. So we will take each of these one after the other, and then we will break them down. Please, this is a little theoretical. So as we go along, feel free to draw my attention in case there's something that is not clear, which you don't understand. And then we can go ahead and try and understand it, right? So that you will be able to follow. So like I said, we'll take each of them one after the other, and then we will explain them, starting from the stage models or the stage theories. Now, the stage models, which are often referred to as the universal path of internationalization. Now, universal path of internationalization because prior to the discovery of the other two theories, being the contingency theory and the interaction theory, what almost everyone knew was the stage theory or the stage models. And that was what everyone used to explain the process of going international or performing global marketing. So at that time, it was the only thing that everybody knew, and hence they referred to it as the universal path of internationalization, such that if any firm is not using this path, then they can't explain what they are doing. Perhaps it's not international. So the stages model, also known as the universal path of internationalization, is one of the first theories that emerged, which tried to explain the process by which firms perform their global marketing or internationalize their activities and operations. Now, the models that fall under the stage theory or the stage model portray a common concept. And this concept is that a firm's decision to go international is a gradual process that is subdivided into various stages. So when we talk about models under the stages theory, the firms who are applying this particular theory are either to proceed in a consistent stepwise fashion, right? So they do so along what we refer to as a continuum in an incremental manner. So it's about going step by step from one level to the other, just like you would when you were climbing a staircase, right? From the base all the way up to the top. And one very popular model under this stages theory of internationalization is what we refer to as the Upsilon International Model. Please, has anyone heard of Upsilon before? Or the Upsilon International Model? Has anyone in this class ever heard of it or come across it anywhere? No one has heard of it?
Not me, please.
Wow, okay. So the Upsilon International Model is one of the typical models that you would find under the stages theory or the stages models. Now, the stage models of internationalization, most popular being the Upsilon Internationalization Model, like I mentioned, is one of the key models that were developed first to explain the process of internationalization, or the process by which firms market their products and services globally. However, these stage models or the stage theory has come under a lot of critique over the years, which has led to the development of the two other theories, being the contingency theory and the interaction theory. Now, what are these critiques that the stage models had leveled against them? The first one being that they are too deterministic and general. Are too deterministic in the sense that it's too presumptuous to say that every firm that is going international would go from one step to the other systematically along a continuum. And I think even at face value, you will all agree with me that indeed it is too presumptuous to say that.
Yes.
Yes.
That's true.
Good. So that was the main thing that made people dislike the stage models. That was the first point of call. And then the second thing was that they focused a lot on downstream value chain internationalization activities. So when we talk about the value chain, I think I exposed you to the value chain a bit in the previous session, didn't I? But you can't remember. All right. So I think it was in our first session or the second session, one of them. We talked about the value chain and the fact that it is a combination of primary activities and support activities. And I remember we discussed it in terms of the fact that firms would often outsource the element of the value chain that it could obtain at a competitive value to foreign markets, rather than sourcing it internally or in their home country. So one of the key critiques leveled against the stage models was that they were focusing mainly on downstream value chain internationalization activities, right? So as we can see from the model, the downstream value chain activities include aspects of outbound logistics, as well as marketing and sales, and then services, which were generally very easy to internationalize. And the best way to internationalize them was often to go systematically, given that outsourcing these aspects of the process to third parties was one that required a lot of trust, because these are the aspects of the value chain activities that are directly linked to revenue generation, isn't it?
Yes.
Good. So to trust someone with your revenue and managing key aspects of your revenue generation, which will directly contribute to your profitability, took time. And you have to be able to do it sequentially and very carefully to ensure that whoever you entrust this to is someone you can trust. So focusing on the downstream value activities, definitely the stage models will be relevant, because indeed you have to proceed with caution when you're trusting a third party with your revenue generation activities, right? Hence, making it a valid critique of the stage models, because you realize that when it comes to the upstream value activities, it is very difficult to indicate that they proceed in a stepwise manner, considering the nature of inbound logistics and company operations. Company operations largely do not operate in a sequential manner. They are not designed to flow in a continuum. They are designed to flow according to the steps and processes that are required to produce a particular product or service, isn't it? So that way, Kafi, were you saying something?
No, sorry, I just joined.
Oh, okay, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So in that vein, we are saying that the upstream value activities are totally ignored in the stages models conceptualization of internationalization by firms. So there is a need for other theories that will help consider these other aspects of the value chain, which have been largely neglected by the stage models as they explain the process of internationalization. Again, another critique of the stage models was that there are more direct and rapid entry modes, right? Given a number of circumstances, particularly based on an analysis of the internal and external environment, because resource endowments are not equal. Conditions in various contexts, be it the micro environment or the macro environment, are not the same. Even considering sub-levels of the macro environment or the external environment, including the political environment, economic environment, socio-cultural environment, among others, are all different. And depending on the conditions, could either contribute to or hinder the process of foreign market entry. So the stage models, looking at it as a slow, progressive, incremental process, is defeatist, given that there are firms that, based on their endowments, have the ability to approach it in a more direct and fast fashion, which made this critique the second major one to be leveled against the stage models. The third critique was that the stage models assume that forward progression is inevitably sequential, consistently cumulative and irreversible, basically saying that every firm that is going international must go forward and progress, and there's no way they can retrogress. However, we all know that doing business...
Tomorrow we are not going to school, so I can do it then.
However, we all know that doing business is something that you cannot predict to a T. So the unpredictable nature of internationalization makes it prone to circumstances that may force a firm to retrogress, right? Or move in the reverse, rather than consistently moving forward. So in case a firm begins discussions with an overseas partner who is going to serve as their subsidiary, and they are moving forward and putting in place operations and agreements to be able to ensure that the internationalization of their products and services takes effect with the help of these subsidiaries. And then all of a sudden, the discussions stall and things do not progress. It means that the stage model is no longer applicable, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Because at that point, they are no longer moving forward. They may have to reverse and go back to the start and start the process of searching for a whole new subsidiary to be their partner. So this was another huge critique leveled against the stage models. And the final critique leveled against this theory was that the models under this theory ignore the environment and context in which internationalization takes place, which I just mentioned could be a contributing factor to a firm not moving slowly and incrementally through the process of internationalization, but they will do so directly and rapidly. And again, due to the same contextual and environmental factors, may not move in the sequential, cumulative, irreversible manner that the stage model suggests. But they may go in the reverse sometimes and retrogress, depending on changes in the environment or context. So because of that, new theories were developed to try and address these different critiques that have been leveled against the stage models. And as we will see very soon, each of the new theories, which is the contingency theory and the interaction theory, address different aspects of these critiques as have been leveled against the stage models or the stage theory of internationalization. Please, I'm seeing a lot about foreigners. Please, are they like real foreigners or I don't understand. Can someone please explain? Tara, what does it mean that we have foreigners in the class?
It looks like people from the other elective
Oh,
are joining us.
Oh,
Okay.
This week.
Okay,
So
I get it now.
they weren't with us the
More
first
invaders.
lessons.
Oh, okay. I understand now. Thank you, Tara. All right. So before we look at the other theories that had been introduced to try and address these critiques we've been talking about, let's look at an example, right? Okay, the other theories are here. Then let's continue before we go into the examples. So given these critiques that were leveled against them, new theories were developed to try and address these critiques that we have talked about. The first one that was developed was the contingency theory or the contingency models. Now, the contingency theory has as their main premise the objective to address the critique of the stage models on how they ignore environmental and contextual factors. So the contingency models address this issue by stating that there is a fit that has to be achieved by firms between their internal resources and environmental conditions in order for internationalization to proceed effectively. So in essence, the contingency models talk about the fact that firms seek a fit between their strengths and weaknesses, which we find internally, and the environmental conditions around them, which present them certain opportunities and threats. And once they are able to find a good balance between these strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, they are able to devise the most appropriate strategy by which they can market their products and services globally, right? And again, because they are looking at all strengths and weaknesses within and all opportunities and threats without in the external environment, they are also able to consider both the upstream and downstream internationalization activities, which was the second critique leveled against the stage models, being that they did not consider both upstream and downstream activities and rather focus heavily on downstream activities. Please, does it make sense?
Yes, it
Good.
does.
Yes, please.
So as we can see, the contingency models have addressed two of the major critiques that were leveled against the stage models, right? And a typical example of this contingency model approach or contingency theory approach is the transaction cost analysis model, which is a kind of contingency model that helps to explain another set of firms' approach to global marketing or internationalization, right? Again, like I mentioned, another theory was developed to help address the shortcomings of the stages models as we have identified them. And that theory, in this case, is the interaction model. But before we do so, let's look at some basic components of the contingency models and how they are able to efficiently address the shortcomings of the stage model. The first one being that because they consider environmental conditions, both internally and externally, they usually have a set of environmental factors that predict how the firm will choose to approach their internationalization. Also, with the contingency models, the opportunities that are defined by the environment that the firm finds themselves in are a large predictor of the alternatives that are available for the firm to choose from when going international. Tara, please, your hand is up.
Yes, I had a question about point one.
Yes.
So this set of environmental factors,
Yes.
Are they predetermined? Is it they would have done their say their PESTEL analysis by this point,
Good.
and they would have selected a set of environmental factors.
They usually don't select
and then by
a
this,
set, right? Based on their PESTEL analysis, they identify
exactly
factors that exist.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, but then I wanted to specify if this environmental factors was the entire group of PESTEL.
Yes, both internal and external. And you know, PESTEL is usually external.
External, yes, for the opportunities and threats.
Good. So they will also do internal.
Okay.
For the strengths and weaknesses. So that's where SWOT comes in. So it's a combination of SWOT and PESTEL.
Okay, in this under point 1.
Good.
They would do all those analysis under here
to
before
arrive
they
by
move
a
on.
set of environmental factors.
Okay.
I believe you've taken marketing research already, or is it international business research or something?
No, we did international
We've
business
done
environment.
Research
methods. You've done research
yes,
methods, right?
Yes.
Good. So you would have learned some of the techniques of gathering data from research methods.
Yes, we did that last semester.
Good. So these tools and techniques are directly applicable in this regard.
Okay.
Because you use the surveys, the interviews, the case studies to be able to do your research to understand all these environmental factors with the PESTEL, and then also to be able to understand your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as the opportunities and threats based on SWOT.
Okay, I'm clear now. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome, Tara. So after this set of environmental factors is identified, based on those environmental factors, the firm can be able to determine clearly those opportunities that are available to them that they can take advantage of. An environmental analysis will usually reveal a number of opportunities, which the organization has to assess based on the next point in point 3, which is the decision criteria. And here it has to do with management preferences and the allocation of resources, because let's bear in mind, firms have different objectives and outcomes that they want to achieve. And going commensurate with these objectives and outcomes is the resources that they have allocated to achieve these objectives and outcomes. So the opportunities that they choose to take advantage of in the external environment must be in line with management's preferences by way of their objectives and the outcomes they want to achieve, as well as the resources that are available, which they can allocate to take advantage of these opportunities. So in the contingency models, all they do is identify the factors present, look at their resources and their preferences, and weigh the opportunities they identify against these preferences and resources. And these preferences and resources represent the outcome of their internal analysis, which has to do with the strengths and weaknesses that they possess. And once they are able to do so, considering the threats in the external environment, which could hinder their activities, they will go ahead and then select the best approach by which to take advantage of these opportunities and make the most of their internal strengths to be able to achieve the outcome of global marketing, which they have determined for themselves, because every firm's global marketing objectives are different, depending on what they hope to achieve. So generally, this is what the contingency models consider. And of the critiques of the stage model approach or the stage model theories, they are able to address the shortcoming in the stages models that have to do with the lack of focus on the external environment and the internal environment and how they can influence the internationalization process, as well as the upstream and downstream activities, both of which are not considered in the stages models. So contingency models address a number of the critiques leveled against the stages models, hence being the second kind of theory that we are considering, which were propounded to help solve the problem of the stages models approach to internationalization. Now, aside the stages model approach and the contingency models, another approach was developed to help address another shortcoming of the stages models, which has to do with interaction. Now, you all bear with me that doing business both locally and internationally involves a lot of interaction among various actors in the business context. True or false?
True.
Good. Now, nowhere in the stages model does it talk about how the interaction between these various actors influences the decision to go international and the strategy with which firms choose to go international. So basically, the interaction theory or the interaction models emphasize the social embeddedness of economic transactions that are involved in global marketing or internationalization as we know it. So the social embeddedness is basically about how people interact and socialize with each other throughout the process involved in a firm deciding to go international and pursuing the process of global marketing. Now, one particular researcher known as Granovetter 1992, based on the interaction models, argues that one, the pursuit of economic goals is typically accompanied by non-economic goals of sociability. So to be able to achieve your economic goals, you need to approach it from the angle of some non-economic goals. So it will not always be about crunching the figures and signing the contracts. It will also be about the non-economic aspects, being the socializations, the meetings, all the various levels and forms of communication that go on before you get to the level where you crunch the figures. So you realize that before any form of agreement takes place between two organizations or two heads of institutions or two units or two partners, some level of sociability goes on, isn't it? We have all these business dinners. We have all these contract signing meetings, which a lot of people enjoy, by the way, and which without having taken place, there may not be any pursuit of economic goals. Because, for instance, in cultures like Southeast Asia, before they go into discussing any concrete business dealings with you, they have to engage with you socially first. Are we aware of that?
Yes.
So they have to invite
they
you
need to
to
make
dinner.
a stronger connection.
Exactly. They have to invite you to dinner, have some conversations with you. Perhaps you will get to meet the family of the CEO and all the people involved. They'll try to get to know you, to see if your values are in line with theirs before they even consider getting into any form of business agreement with you. David Otro, you said roadshow by Cocoa Board in its syndication loan facility. Yeah, we could say that. But you need to throw more light on the details of it, please. So when Tara is done asking her question, David, please just give us a gist of what it's all about. Tara, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to, if you look at what you've just explained in terms of the social aspect driving the economic aspect, don't you think that is somewhat covered under the contingency models when you do, say, your pestle analysis?
Good.
Because that would come under the socio-cultural factors in there, and you would know that it would implement or impact your business one way or the other.
Good.
So yes, if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Good.
Thank
so that
you.
is why these are theories that stand on their own. Do you get it?
Okay.
So a firm can decide we are going the interaction approach.
Okay.
Or we are
so
going
these
the
are more wholesome.
Approach. Good.
Okay.
Because even though on the surface you can see elements of each of them in there, we realize that it is because of the fact that both theories were developed to address the problems we had with the stages model.
Flaws.
Good.
Okay.
So there should be good alternatives to it, whichever one you decide to pick.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, Tara. So David, you said what? It is preliminary meeting between officials of Cocoa Board and representatives of financial institutions willing to give the loan facility. Okay, exactly. So it's like they're testing the waters to see if this agreement is viable at all, right? And sometimes it is an important precursor to entering into a business agreement, without which the final business agreement may not happen at all. So a lot of organizations treat these socialization opportunities very seriously because it could mean winning the contract or losing it, depending on who your partner is and their background. Also, Granovetter still argues that economic action is socially situated in ongoing networks of personal and business relationships, being that even if you have been able to get the contract or you've been able to sign the agreement, you still need a network of personal and business relationships to keep that relationship going and to keep that relationship relevant, right? So you cannot go international per the interaction models acting like an atomized individual or an atomized unit in a whole system. Because on your own, you will not be able to achieve the process of going international and do so smoothly. Definitely, per this theory, along the way, you need to engage in some kind of personal and business interaction in order to successfully engage in global marketing activity, right? Also, economic institutions are socially constructed, which is very, very true. Even before the firm goes international, in its home country, the firm thrives on socially constructed relationships, be it between the employees within the organization, the employees and middle management and top management, as well as the relationship between the organization and other external stakeholders, like the governments in the countries in which they operate. These are all relationships that are economically based, which are socially constructed, right? So the interaction models emphasize on the role of this network of relationships, both personal and business, and how it enhances and supports the process of internationalization. And one typical model under the interaction theory or the interaction models approach is the network model. So we are going to go ahead and look at each of these models that we have given as examples of the different theories, right? So for the stages model, what was the example of the model we gave under that?
Upsilon.
Upsilon, thank you. Well done, Mamiesi. So the Upsilon model is the example of the stages model. What of the contingency model? What example did we give under that? Mamiesi, you want to go again?
I think I didn't know that one. I just wrote transaction cost analysis model, yeah.
Yes, good, Mamiesi. So that's the transaction cost analysis model. And then the third one under the interaction model is the network model. So we will consider each of these one after the other, and then we will break them down. So well done, Mamiesi.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So example of the stages model, like we said, is the Upsilon model. Now let's talk a bit about the origins of the Upsilon model. The Upsilon model is also known as the Scandinavian internationalization model. And that is because it was developed by some old men in Scandinavia in 1970. And they were in the University of Uppsala, hence the name of the model being the Uppsala internationalization model. And these Swedish researchers sat down and identified that when it came to the internationalization of Swedish manufacturing firms, there were certain things that were common among them regarding their approach to internationalization. And these include, one, the fact that the companies appeared to begin their operations abroad in markets that were fairly close to them geographically, and only gradually penetrated to more far-flung markets, right? So they would usually start with the countries that were close to them. So in terms of geography, when we talk about countries that are close to Sweden, which other countries can we talk about? Geographically, which countries are close to Sweden? Where are the geog students? Geographically, which countries are close to Sweden? I gave you a clue earlier. I mentioned that it is the Scandinavian theory. Good, Nigel, Denmark. Juliet, which other one? Juliet, which other one?
Norway, please.
Norway, exactly. Norway is another good one. Geographically close. Right?
Madam, Finland.
Finland, exactly, also geographically close in the Scandinavia region. And you realize that these countries we've mentioned, well done, Richard, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland are also psychically close. So in terms of psychic distance, they have certain similarities and characteristics in common when we talk about their culture and their social institutions. You realize that, right?
Yes.
Good. So they are one of the foremost, this group of countries are some of the foremost countries in the world that are known for female empowerment and gender equality, right? And they have a lot of other things in common when it comes to how they go about their business dealings, and are also among the few countries in the EU that have refused to use the euro and have decided to maintain their individual currencies. So this is the first thing that the Swedish researchers identified when it came to how Swedish firms went international. They chose countries like Denmark, Finland, and Norway that were geographically close and psychically close to them as well, to be able to start doing business before considering markets that were further away. Also, they noticed that the companies entered new markets mainly through exports. And as we will learn in our next session, exports are the basic and usually the starting point for almost every firm that wants to go international and wants to do so progressively. So they realized that most of these firms entered the new markets through exports, which was one of the basic, in fact, which is the most basic form of internationalization or global marketing that there is, right? Additionally, they realized that it was very rare for companies to enter new markets with sales organizations or manufacturing subsidiaries on their own, right? If they were to enter using subsidiaries, subsidiaries are several levels above exports. And firms would usually set up a subsidiary once they have done enough of exports and have learned enough about the market to be able to set up a subsidiary in that market. And it takes a considerable amount of resource allocation to be able to do that, right? So they realized that it was rare for these organizations to do so. And that was mainly based on the ideology that they came up with, given that they believe the firms would usually start very low with limited commitment through exports, and then they would gradually work their way up to more complicated forms of internationalization that required more levels of resource commitment, which were essentially more risky. So they start with limited risk before they graduate. They also identified that wholly owned or majority owned operations are established only after several years of exports to the same market. Good, like alliances, David. Thank you for that. So like I mentioned, until they have gained enough experience, which usually comes with several years of using the forms or modes of internationalization that required less risk and less resource commitments, will they go ahead and use more complex forms of internationalization that required more resource commitment and were essentially more risky? And it was based on these observations from the data they gathered that made them come up with the ideology that firms would usually internationalize sequentially, and they would do so incrementally and in an irreversible manner, because they noticed that the firms just simply kept progressing from low levels and less complicated levels to more complicated forms of internationalization. So essentially, the Upsilon model suggests that there's a sequential pattern of entry into successive foreign markets. Now, this successive foreign market entry starts from markets that are geographically close and have less psychic distance, and then progressively moving towards more geographically distant countries that were more psychically distant from the home country. And this was coupled with a progressive deepening of commitment to each market, because like I mentioned, they would usually use less resource intensive methods like export to be able to enter a market before they go on to more resource intensive and more risky methods of internationalization, which require more years of experience and knowledge about this particular market that they will be doing that in, right? So they would usually choose additional geographic markets with little psychic distance incrementally, right? And then choosing entry modes with few additional risk also in an incremental manner. And then as their experience grows, they commit more resources and take on more risk till they are able to reach a level where they are able to set up what we refer to as wholly owned subsidiaries in this foreign market. But again, not every firm gets there. And that is what the stages models often fail to recognize. Bridget, please go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to confirm this model.
Yes,
so
please. Feel free.
Does it mean that, like, let's say Casapreco it's in Nigeria now.
Yes.
So
please.
let's say it starts with exports, and then as the market, like the demand for the products grow, sets up a factory in Nigeria at the end of.
Good.
That's what this model is talking about.
Yes, but some will not go straight to setting up a factory. Depending on what their objectives are, they will be exporting through independent exporters.
Okay.
Then they will start exporting using their own exporting offices, which they will open there and operate themselves.
Okay.
Right? Good. Then rather than exporting from here, they will decide to set up perhaps a sales subsidiary. So as we will learn in the next session with regard to the modes, we will see all the progressive levels by which firms move through the process of internationalization. But you are right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, Bridget. Okay, so that essentially is what the Upsilon internationalization model is all about, right? So they outlined 4 main stages, which according to Johansson and Wiederschimpel 1975, include stage 1, where they are doing no regular export activity. So the exports they start with is not very consistent. It's sporadic in the sense that it's every now and then. And some organizations, to contribute to the sporadic nature, will not export until they get an unsolicited order from that foreign market. So that contributes to a large extent to the sporadic nature of it, because until someone places an order, they don't send anything across the border. Then they progress to export via independent representatives. So here, there are people who live in the foreign market that they want to enter into, who are, say, distributors. They are independent distributors. They distribute a lot of things. And then they decide that, okay, they are going to partner with Casapreco and be the ones who will distribute Casapreco in Nigeria. So in that case, they are independent representatives. Casapreco does not own them. Casapreco is simply leveraging or piggybacking on their influence in the market to sell their products. Then we have stage 3, which involves the establishment of a foreign sales subsidiary, where Casapreco decides that at this point, we are exporting so much that the independent representatives are taking a lot of the profit. So let's set up our own sales subsidiary to be the exclusive distributor of our product in this foreign market. And that is stage 3. Then after they have gained enough experience and they have realized that, okay, we now know enough about the market, we are selling a lot, it makes sense for us to set up a whole production and manufacturing unit to manufacture in Nigeria to service the whole, the huge needs of the market, right? And this is what the stages model has been criticized for, in the sense that it only identifies the forward progression of the firm in the foreign market, not taking into consideration the fact that it does not always occur in that forward, irreversible, cumulative manner. However, per the tenets of the Upsilon model, firms just move forward and upward from no regular export activity all the way up after several years of experience in the foreign market to foreign production and manufacturing units that are set up to exclusively serve the needs of that foreign market. Please, I hope that makes sense. All right, so that is it for the Upsilon model. Next, we are going to look at an example of a contingency model, which we have discussed in practice to some extent just before we resumed our lecture. So the specific model we are looking at under the contingency model or the contingency theory approach is the transaction cost analysis model. Now here it's about firms basing their decision to go international on the concept of cost minimization. So when it comes to the transaction cost analysis model, firms would usually perform internally those activities that they believe they can be able to execute on their own at a lower cost, using their own management and implementation systems. While they will rely only on market activities from independent outsiders, only if it poses some kind of cost advantage to the firm. So they will only outsource something to an outsider if they believe that they cannot execute it at a cost advantage internally. So in the event that they believe it is cheaper to set up their own sales subsidiary than to use an export representative in the foreign market, they will do so. So it's all about cost here. What is the cost of the transaction? And will it be cheaper or lower if we did it ourselves than if we outsourced it to an independent outsider, and vice versa? So that's what the transaction cost analysis model is all about. So in this regard, the transaction cost equation identifies that transaction costs are made up of a combination of ex-ante costs, which are costs that are incurred prior to the internationalization activity, and then ex-post costs, costs that are incurred after the internationalization activity has been initiated. And ex-ante costs are made up of what we refer to as search costs and contracting costs. So specifically, search costs refer to the cost of gathering information to be able to identify and evaluate potential export intermediaries. Now, this cost will only be incurred if the firm believes that they cannot undertake this particular activity internally at a minimal cost. So they will have to search for an outsider to undertake that activity. And the process of going through that search and doing the vetting and evaluation involves a certain amount of cost, which they refer to as search costs. Now, once the search costs have been incurred and they've been able to evaluate potential intermediaries to help with the exports, they end up with what we refer to as contracting costs, which are associated with negotiating and writing up contracts and agreements between themselves and these export subsidiaries or intermediaries whom they have decided to work with. So at the sum of these search costs and contracting costs together come together to make what we refer to as the ex-ante costs, which are the costs that are incurred before the internationalization activity begins. Then once the contracts have been signed, the intermediaries have been engaged, and internationalization begins, firms begin to incur what we refer to as ex-post costs. Now, these ex-post costs are made up of monitoring costs, which are the costs that are associated with monitoring the agreement that has been signed between the firm, being the producer, and their export intermediary to ensure that each person fulfills their part of the agreement. And there are costs involved in doing this because bear in mind, this intermediary is in the foreign country and the firm is in their home country. So they need to incur costs to be able to get the necessary systems and people and processes in place to monitor the ongoing internationalization of global marketing activity in this foreign market to ensure that it goes along with what has been agreed in the contract. Yes, Tara, this would include legal. Because legal will help draw up the contracts. Legal will ensure that everyone signs the contract. And legal will assist to be able to ensure that all the different terms and clauses in the contract are being adhered to. Now, in addition to the monitoring costs, there's also enforcement costs, which are referred to in terms of the sanctions that the firm will apply in case their partner in the foreign country, being the export intermediary, does not adhere to the agreement or does not perform the various clauses that have been agreed in the contracts that was signed. Hence, once again, like Tara said, legal will come in here because legal will have to assist with the enforcement to ensure that they are dealt with to the full extent of the law. So these are the kinds of costs that usually come into play when we are talking about transaction costs in the transaction cost analysis approach. So firms would usually look at each of these costs and try to be able to determine what the implications are for outsourcing it or undertaking it internally using the firm's own management and implementation system. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yes, please. I would want to ask that for this transaction cost, does it rule out any psychic distance? Or even though you are going to undertake this transaction cost, you still have to look out for countries with a lower psychic distance, or it roots out that one completely and looks at the transaction alone?
It doesn't rule it out completely because psychic distance plays a role when you are trying to enter into an agreement.
Yes, please. Yes.
Depending on what similarities you have in common with this partner of yours in the foreign market, getting to the partner to agree with you on the same things is sometimes easier when there's less psychic distance than when the psychic distance is larger. So you need to take that into consideration as well.
Okay, so that. Okay.
So for instance, let me give you a typical example. If China wants to start exporting to Ghana, which a lot of Chinese companies in Ghana do, they would first go in search of a Chinese-owned company in Ghana that can serve as their subsidiary. If they do not find one, before they would look out for another organization that could serve as a subsidiary in the absence of a Chinese-owned one. So in this case, you realize that they are considering psychic distance because dealing with a Chinese-owned subsidiary in Ghana to them would be easier than dealing with a wholly owned Ghanaian subsidiary or a subsidiary owned by another nationality. Elizabeth, does that make sense?
Yes, please, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. So psychic distance still comes into play. Tara, please go ahead.
So I have a follow-up question in terms of the one Elizabeth just asked and psychic distance.
Yes.
But in this case, is it safe to assume that the primary driver would be the cost? So yes, they would have identified that it's cheaper or it's more cost effective to have it in the other country, and that would be their driver to enter that country for internationalization.
Exactly, Tara.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so now that we know what goes into computing this transaction cost on the part of the firm, we need to be able to appreciate the fact that firms would always attempt to minimize the combination of these costs when undertaking transactions. So like Tara said, the primary motive begins from the cost implications, which is the approach that will best minimize the cost involved in undertaking the whole process of going international. Right? So that's where it usually begins. So when considering the most efficient form of going international, be it through exports or through foreign sales subsidiary or using independent exporters or independent representatives in the foreign market, the firm will always choose the solution that minimizes the sum of the two costs that we have talked about. Hence, cost is the main basis of this particular approach. Emmanuel, you said further explanation of psychic distance. Okay, so psychic distance refers to the perceptions of similarities in terms of the characteristics between two countries. So the more psychic distance there is between two countries, the more different in terms of the culture and the economic environment and the way of life and the political terrain is between these countries. So when it comes to cyclic distance, for instance, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are cyclically very distant, in the sense that when you look at their way of life and their culture compared to that of Ghanaians, we are quite different. Isn't it, Emmanuel? Okay, perhaps Emmanuel is having sound challenges. But generally, to the class, between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, we are quite different.
Very different.
Yeah, there's a large cyclic distance between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. However, when you're comparing Ghana and Nigeria, the distance becomes a bit shorter or smaller because we share quite a bit in common with our Nigerian counterparts. So in that case, cyclic distance between the two countries and Ghana is very different. Where we have a large or huge or distant, how do I put it? It's the same way. Okay, where we have a large cyclic distance between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, we have a smaller cyclic distance between Ghana and Nigeria. Emmanuel, I hope that makes sense and it answers your question. Okay, so in terms of the transaction cost analysis, thank you, Emmanuel. We can basically say that transaction costs through externalization, if they end up being higher than the control cost through an internal hierarchical system, then the firm would rather internalize, being undertaking the activity themselves because it is cheaper, right? Through its own subsidiaries, which they will set up, rather than leaving it in the hands of these foreign subsidiaries or intermediaries in the form of agents in the other countries who would make the firm incur a higher cost. So ultimately, it still goes back to the issue of cost minimization, which is the primary driver for firms that go in for this particular approach to internationalization. Now, we have finished with the contingency theory approach, and we have established the nature of transaction cost analysis as one of the models under that approach. And now we are going to move on to the interaction theory or the interaction models, particularly looking at the network model as an example under that particular approach. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Please, before you move on, I don't know, I would want you to clarify for me for the internalization and then the externalization. I don't know if I'm getting it right before you move on. I think that was the previous slide before this.
Yes, internalization is about deciding to do everything internally, using their own resources and management systems. And that is usually because in their own estimation, it will be cheaper for them to undertake the activity on their own, rather than to trust it to an external organization, hence the term externalization. So if the transaction costs through externalization are higher than internalization, they would rather go the internalization approach than use the externalization approach.
That's clear. Thank you.
You're welcome, Elizabeth. Enoch, did you have something to say? May Queen, please go ahead.
Okay, so please, what are some criticisms of the contingency theory?
That'll be your homework.
Please, I need help.
I haven't given you homework yet, so that'll be your homework. So
and I have another one.
Yes, bring the other one.
Okay. In literature, that these theories are not. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, these theories are not standalone theories when it comes to our context, that's the developing countries. But in the explanations given in class, I see that we are using them as standalone theories to describe business activities of companies. So I need you to speak to that, please.
We are not using them as standalone. You see, if you pick one particular theory, it can explain one aspect of what a firm is doing. Are you with me?
Okay.
So in the event
Yes,
that, for
please.
instance, we are able to get the whole strategy of, say, Blue Skies or Fan Mail, we can break it down to be able to see which models they are applying and in which aspects they are applying it. So for instance, you can have a particular company that is using transaction cost for certain aspects of their internationalization and then using stages for other aspects of it.
Okay.
Good. So at any point in time,
right.
you can find a firm operating different strategies. But to be able to understand it, we have to be able to explain them as standalone concepts and theories in order for us to get it. Once we get it, we can be able to apply it in practice and be able to understand how firms are using them.
Okay.
So at the end of
please,
this session, yes, May-Queen, go ahead.
Okay, no, please go ahead.
No, I was saying that, so at the end of this session, there's a small assignment for you, which is based on this, and you will receive a case that will require you to decipher the approaches that the firm is using of these three.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, so the third one is about strategic adaptation theory. If you can explain how it applies to firms' internationalization.
What is strategic adaptation? Did I mention strategic adaptation?
No, you did not.
Maybe. Please, let's give it to what I'm explaining in this class, because members are even yet to understand what we have here. You are going to bring...
given your explanations, I think if you can clarify that, it will help me understand
adaptation and standardization. Yes, Julia, she's ahead of the class. Maybe adaptation and standardization come in when we are talking about the firm's application of the marketing mix.
No, please. So let me explain why I asked the question.
Okay.
I understand that when it comes to internal capabilities of firms, they can look through their internal resources and try to adapt to the international demands. So that adaptation is like, it's a response to the competition in the international market.
Yes,
so
and that is a whole other lecture.
Okay. Please, I'll hold on to that.
So adaptation and standardization, like I said, it depends on, like we have talked about severally in the previous sessions and today's session, the different contextual issues that need to be addressed. So based on the contextual issues, both internal and external, the firm will either decide to adapt elements of their global marketing, starting from how they create the product or service, to how they price it, to how they promote it and how they distribute it, right? So they can either decide to adapt it, make changes to it, or standardize it, take it as it's being applied in the home country and apply it in all the foreign countries that they want to enter into. Right? So standardization and adaptation is a whole other session which we are not there yet. But I'm glad you are excited, May-Queen. It makes me excited as well. Right,
so I'll hold on to my questions.
Sure.
If we ever get there, then I'll ask them. Thank you so much, Doc.
You're welcome, May-Queen. We'll get there very soon, so don't worry.
All right, sure.
All right. So moving on from the contingency theory approach and the transaction cost analysis model, we are going into the interaction theory, and we are looking at an example of the network model. Now, the network model thrives on the existence of business networks. And as you will all agree with me, business cannot do without the act of networking. And when we talk about business networks and their application in global marketing, it's all about where actors are autonomous and linked to each other through relationships, which are flexible in the sense that these relationships evolve and change over time, right? And may alter according to the rapid changes in the environment. So the flexible nature of these relationships means that depending on what relationships the firm is able to form and the benefits they are able to accrue as a result of these relationships they have formed, gives them certain opportunities that enable them to select a particular form or approach to internationalization. So a firm may be able to apply a transaction cost approach to internationalization, perhaps because of the network model, in that they belong to a particular business network that gives them the opportunity to minimize costs. in certain aspects of their global marketing or internationalization activities, right? So when it comes to the network model, it is the glue that keeps the relationships together, that determines how beneficial the relationships are going to be on the firm's journey towards internationalization. And these glues may come at the technical level, where certain technical know-how is being exchanged, or at the economic level, or in terms of legal and personal ties, where personal ties influence a lot of business decisions and activities, particularly in places like the Middle East and Southeast Asia, right? So the theory holds that the relationships of a firm in a domestic network can be used as bridges to other networks in other countries, right? Hence the relevance of the network model in global marketing or internationalization. So a basic assumption in the network model is that the individual firm is dependent on resources controlled by other firms. So the assumption here is that the firm does not possess all the resources that they need to be able to effectively undertake this move of global marketing. And the rest of the resources that they will need are not available internally, but they are available externally. And the only way they can access these external resources is through the networks that they are part of and the positions that they occupy in these networks, right? And because the development of these networks takes time and sometimes depends on resource accumulations, some firms must establish and develop positions in relation to their counterparts in foreign networks. Sometimes they have to piggyback. That's all this statement is saying, to be able to get to the point they want to when it comes to their global marketing or internationalization, or to be able to achieve their internationalization objectives. So this is a typical diagram depicting what we just talked about in terms of being able to rely on counterparts in foreign networks. And you can see that in this model, in country A, the home country, the head office of the organization is there. And they have a sub-supplier that is having a head office in that same home country, also having a subsidiary in another country, which they own. So to be able to gain access to the foreign country, to be able to set up a subsidiary, they decided to piggyback on their relationship with this sub-supplier in the home country to establish their own subsidiary in the foreign country, which is country B. And because it is a partnership, the sub-supplier is handling the downstream aspect of the value chain. So they decided to set up a production subsidiary to handle which part of the value chain?
The upstream.
Upstream. So you realize that they are leveraging their relationship, isn't it? And one of them is supporting the other. So while one is handling the downstream activities and is already there, they use that relationship to be able to set up an upstream production subsidiary to support their activities in that particular market. And because of the link that that particular subsidiary already has with governmental organizations, they have the capability to make the process easier for them to set up the production subsidiary in that market, piggybacking once again on the knowledge and the relationships that the sub-supplier has in that foreign market. Now, because their sub-supplier is not in this foreign market, they are able to use the knowledge they have learned from the activities of this sub-supplier to be able to set up their own sales subsidiary in a third country, which is country C. Please, can we see that?
Yes, we
Good.
can see that.
And that is based on the experience they have gained in their exchanges with their supplier in this market. So they have enough knowledge to set up their own sales subsidiary to supply their products in this market. Right? And there they have their own relationships with the customers, as well as a bank in that market, which perhaps is giving them some form of financial support. And often through the relationships with bankers, various organizations can also establish trade links with other agents in foreign countries. So you realize that instead of setting up a sales subsidiary or a production subsidiary in country D, they just chose to work with an agent in that country. Do you see that? Who already has connection with the customers in that market. So you realize that by belonging to a network with varied relationships, firms can be able to leverage on the contacts of their counterparts in these different foreign markets to be able to benefit from their relationships to advance their international marketing or global marketing objectives. Please, does that make sense?
Yes, Doc, it does.
Good. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yes, please. So I want to ask that, so you see where in country D, where they have the agent and the customer,
yes,
does it mean that over the period, the sales also get improves in country D? They might also set up another subsidiary. I want to know if that is possible, that when
yes,
the sales in country D start increasing. Okay.
Yes, it is possible, depending on, like we mentioned earlier, if they are applying transaction cost, they will do the transaction cost analysis and see if it makes sense to set up a subsidiary and which one will cost more, setting up a subsidiary or continuing to work with the agent. Elizabeth, does that make sense?
Yes, yes,
Good.
yes.
So that goes back to what I was telling May Queen, that we are treating them individually, but they interact with each other. Firms would usually use aspects of each of them to facilitate their global marketing activity. So in one aspect, the firm may be leveraging upon the network model, using the network of relationships they have, and then using that to perform transaction cost analysis to see how the network can help them minimize costs when it comes to going international. And by doing so, they will be able to accurately determine whether they should move in the stages model, which is progressively and incrementally, or move on to use an approach that we refer to as born globals, where they decide that based on the transaction cost analysis and the relationships that they have, it doesn't make sense to go international gradually or incrementally, starting from sporadic export and growing slowly through export modes and then foreign sales subsidiaries. They'll just jump and start at foreign sales subsidiary. So when we talk about bond globals, what are we saying? We are saying a bond global is a firm that from its birth globalizes rapidly without any preceding long-term domestic or internationalization period. So like I said, they just move and jump through the stages. Now, this act of jumping through the stages and jumping over certain stages is what we refer to as leapfrogging. Have you heard about leapfrogging before? So leapfrogging is a phrase that is symbolic of the way frogs are able to leap and jump over long distances. And that concept is what we use to explain how born globals are born and evolve. They leapfrog mostly through most of the stages of internationalization, such that they do not go gradually, starting from the domestic and then internationalizing incrementally in small quantities over a period. They would usually skip certain stages and not follow the traditional patterns of internationalization that we are used to. And this has been proven by years of research, right? So born globals are usually said to represent an interesting case of internationalization where they are able to operate under what we refer to as time and space compression. Now, time and space compression in the sense that whereas other firms would usually use a long amount of time and progress in terms of space from more geographically close contexts to further geographic contexts incrementally over time, these born globals do not respect this time-space continuum. They would usually compress it and spend less time or take less time to go through certain stages of internationalization. So you will find out that instead of starting from sporadic exports and migrating slowly through the different modes, they would automatically start from, they may not even serve the domestic market for starters. They may start by serving the foreign market and rather work their way backwards. So all these processes of geographic dispersion and psychic distance and the issue of time are compressed when it comes to bond globals. However, this is subject to if there is infrastructure, communication, and information technology, which has been the large driver of bond globals in recent times, to be able to support this time-space compression that facilitates the movement of bond globals in this speedy fashion through the stages of internationalization. And the most distinguishing feature of these bond globals is the fact that a lot of them are managed by entrepreneurial visionaries who believe that the world is a borderless marketplace. So there's nothing like you have to start from your home country before you gradually progress externally to other markets and other regions. You can easily start today and not sell to anyone domestically and start by selling to people in Cote d'Ivoire, selling to people in Egypt and other countries that are further away from your home country, because of the concept of time-space compression that is largely facilitated by information communication technology. And this facilitation of internet information communication technology, which fuels most bond globals, has led to a subgroup of bond globals, which are referred to as internet-based bond globals. And we see a lot of these organizations online day in, day out, right? They are able to use the new innovations in information communication technology to facilitate their movements from their home country to other foreign markets to be able to internationalize their products and services and sell them in these foreign markets, sometimes without having an actual presence in their home market. And we see that in recent times, the platforms that are mainly facilitating these internet-based bond global businesses is which platforms? Which platforms are facilitating this over the internet? Which internet-based platforms are facilitating these internet-based bond global firms?
Instagram.
Instagram, right? Well done, Anakosia. Instagram. That's one of them. Facebook is another, right? So the social media platforms. Phyllis says Twitter, Mariaba, Facebook, yes, right? Then we also have the ability to set up these e-commerce websites, which have become so easy because of the DIY nature and the various software that have been developed to facilitate the setting up of these platforms, like WordPress. WordPress is one of the easiest ways by which you can build an e-commerce website. Another one is Wix. It's also another easy software that you can, with very basic know-how, build your own e-commerce website and start doing business internationally. So you realize that the internet revolution, coupled with all these platforms, enables young SMEs to establish a global sales platform right from the onset by developing these e-commerce websites that we are talking about. Yes, Tara, Squarespace is another one, right? So these internet-based bond globals have become very popular, and they are many, basically because of what we talked about in terms of the time-space compression and the power of information communication technology that is fueling their global marketing tactics, right? However, it is important to note that many of these firms do not only rely on internet-based channels, because we know that a lot of them do not sell services. A lot of them sell physical products. However, because the internet facilitates the sale, they are able to use that in conjunction with other conventional offline channels to be able to ensure that the products that they sell online are able to be distributed to the buyers in the various foreign markets. So you realize that a person who is into this kind of business and is running an internet-based bond global firm would usually use the internet to generate leads and promote their products. And then they will also use it to take orders. And then when it comes to the fulfillment of the orders, which includes distribution, right, and retailing functions, they will do so using physical intermediaries, like the famous couriers that we know that are very efficiently distributing products day in, day out all over the world, including DHL, isn't it? and UPS. So these physical intermediaries, good, FedEx. Thank you, Tara. So these physical intermediaries facilitate the work of these internet-based bond globals by helping them to combine it with the internet-based channels to ensure that the products and services that they are able to sell using these online channels are effectively distributed offline to the customers in these foreign markets, right? So that is it for the internet-based bond globals. And aside that, we can also talk about born-again global firms. Okay, Tara, please go ahead.
Okay, I had a question about the internet-based. You gave the example of the couriers helping them with the deliveries and the distribution.
Yes.
But then is there, in the case where they probably even have they have distributors on the ground or people that they've networked with, they have these, those would also fall under part of the conventional offline channels that they rely on, correct?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. And
so
then
the distributors in the market are just another form of intermediary.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. And then the other question I had was that I may have the born globals. Now we're talking about all these different types of born globals.
Yes.
Are they a different model on their own, or those are under the network model?
Good.
Because they all rely on networks.
Good. Right. So born globals can be categorized as another theory of internationalization. Do you get?
Okay.
Good.
Yes.
So
even though there are three major ones, the additional, maybe less popular, are the born globals.
The born globals. But right now, we can't say they are less popular anymore.
Because they're, well, I'm just saying that because when we started the lecture, you said that the three main types that firms adopt are those first three.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is the one that is generally practiced. But you notice that in recent times, the bond globals, particularly the internet-based bond globals, are also slowly gaining traction.
Yes. Slowly, quickly.
I say slowly because in various contexts, like our context, their activities are largely unregulated.
Okay.
So we cannot tell for sure the sheer size of the internet-based bond globals and how much business they are actually doing.
Okay.
Because in Ghana, for instance, we know next to nothing about internet-based firms, isn't it? Especially those on the social media platforms.
Yeah, there are very few.
Internet-based.
No, they are not very few. There are many.
There are millions. You see, that's exactly my point right now.
Expectations.
My point right now. They are so unregulated that we don't know anything about them. There are so many of them, Tara. So many. And because of the limited barriers to entry when it comes to the internet.
Yes.
Day in, day out,
can just
new ones. Exactly. There are many. So you see how interesting?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very interesting.
There are many. They are not being monitored, so you can't tell exactly what is happening.
Exactly.
But that's what is going on, and even the COVID made it worse.
Exactly. Recently, there was a study that was done that analyzed Ghana's imports, right? And the shocking revelation was that one of the largest imports was in the area of beauty items, particularly cosmetics and hair.
Yes.
So someone was asking, where are these hair sellers and cosmetic sellers that we don't see? And I was like, well, they are online.
Yeah, they're online. They
pick them up from the post office. So
they pick them up from the post office.
Exactly. So Tara, you see the gravity. When I mentioned the hair and cosmetics, I think it has painted a better picture for you.
Yeah.
It has. It has.
There are many. There are a lot.
So even though they are not very popular, they are a slowly growing aspects that we as global marketers need to start looking into. Especially if we want the nations to start benefiting from the growth of these sectors.
That they are seeing.
Exactly,
yes.
Because they are unregulated and they are making so much money and they are not paying as much taxes as these recognized multinationals who are doing the transaction costs and the Upsilon and the network model, they are the ones who are doing visible international marketing. So the rules apply to them. But these internet-based bond globals are just flying under the radar, but they are moving huge amounts of revenue.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the insight on that.
You're welcome, Kara. And thank you, Jemima. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yes, please. For the internet-based globals, bond globals, you were saying that most of them are dealing with products. But now I've seen a lot of services, especially online, where people are saying that
I'm available for
travel and all that.
Yeah, I was saying that for those who deal with services, they don't need to use a combination. Because you know a lot of the services can be sold and distributed online.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
But for those who sell products, physical products, they don't have a choice but to use a combination because they have to get a way of physically distributing the item once it has been purchased.
Okay.
So please, that's what I meant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you too. David, Zoom is not born global. Zoom was birthed in the US and people were using it for many years. It was COVID that made it go global. Because once COVID came, all of a sudden, people were looking for means of communication, which did not involve face-to-face. And there were two very popular platforms. I think it was it Google Chat and Zoom? Then there was another one called Free Conference Call.
Yes.
Yeah. But of all of them, it seems Zoom was the more reliable one, and they had a better business model, which organizations could sign on to. Microsoft Teams too became very strong because a lot of organizations were already signed onto the Microsoft package. University of Ghana, for instance, has an agreement with Microsoft in terms of emails. So we have Microsoft Teams automatically, but for our lectures, because is it Ghana University something decided to buy Zoom, they put all of us onto the platform. So we all teach on Zoom. All right, so Zoom was there before COVID. So it's not a born global, unfortunately. Juliet, can you hear now? Okay, Juliet, let me know if you can't hear still. Oh, okay, I think it's just Juliet. Sorry about that. So aside the internet-based bond globals, we can also talk about the born-again globals. Now, these are firms that were previously focused on just domestic markets. Then based on some kind of change in the environment, like for instance, a change in ownership, which is a critical event, or a takeover by another company that is largely experienced when it comes to global marketing, they all of a sudden embrace rapid and dedicated internationalization. So they can go from no foreign presence to all of a sudden having sales subsidiaries or production subsidiaries in different countries or foreign markets. So in this way, the acquired firm, which previously was wholly based in the home country or the domestic market, gains access to these foreign markets by means of financial resources or managerial capability or market knowledge of the international markets that they gained through this change in ownership or takeover by this new company that happens to possess these resources, which facilitates their movement into the foreign countries. So the home country may be their comfort zone for many years. They may not have considered internationalization until this change in ownership or takeover happens. And then all of a sudden, they come into perhaps a huge amount of financial resources or previous capabilities that they did not have to facilitate their global expansion. All of a sudden, because of this takeover and change in ownership, they have. And also previous market knowledge about international markets that they did not have, which limited them from going international. By virtue of this change of ownership and takeover by this new company, they all of a sudden possess. And because of that, they can afford to expand rapidly into foreign markets, which hitherto would not have been an option given their previous circumstance. So that is it for born again globals. Then we can talk about the born regionals. Now, these born regionals are born automatically, not just serving their domestic or home country, but to serve a particular region. So their activities from the onset are not limited to their home country. Their activities are limited to a particular region, which they have been set up to serve. So across the world, as we saw in the Unilever example, firms may decide to break up their markets into different regions to be able to determine which ones are the ones that they can best serve using a particular global marketing strategy, right? So the firm can decide to break up the world into different regions, often starting from their home region, which is psychically close to them and is also geographically close. So a country in Ghana, a firm in Ghana, that decides to be a born regional may start out by serving countries in the West African region or countries in the Sub-Saharan African region. Or a country that was born in Europe may decide that, okay, they are serving the whole European region and not just their home country in Europe. And this is what is characteristic of born regionals. So like their born again global counterparts, they may expand sporadically across this region, depending on their resource possessions, their managerial capabilities, and how much knowledge they have about these different markets within their region, right? And that is it for the born regionals. So in essence, what are we saying? We are talking about the fact that there are various pathways to internationalization, which will often involve firms using a combination of these different models and theories and approaches that we have talked about, depending on the context that they are entering into and the situation in their home country as it relates to their current operations. And considering the different elements that are at their disposal, given the various models that we have talked about, a firm may decide to use one particular approach or the other. So when it comes to pathways to internationalization, firms are often influenced by their external and internal environment, which leads them to be able to assess their characteristics and what they can and cannot do when it comes to going global, which leads them to the decision of whether or not it is feasible to go international. And once they are able to decide to go international, they can either decide to go the organic pathway using the Upsilon model and do so progressively over time, or use other models like the transaction cost analysis and the network model to be able to support their movements to different markets depending on their resource endowments, capabilities, and the knowledge that they have about these markets. Or they can decide that they will not move sequentially or move through different stages or use these different models to be able to determine their movement wholly. But they will decide to use the one global pathway, utilizing elements of the contingency models we have discussed, being transaction cost, or the interaction models being the network model, to facilitate their born global activities, either as internet-based born globals, born again globals, or born regionals, to be able to expand into different markets. Again, considering their resource endowments, their managerial capabilities, as well as the knowledge that they have about these various markets. And with that, we've come to the end of our session today on internationalization theories and models.